Okay, so in this deck profile, we'll be doing another deck list for yellow-blue control deck, but this one will be more focused on using the Overlord ruler versus the other deck that used Wizard. So, for the deck, again, still running for Lucifer, because again, very good. We usually will never use the last ability to DR to untap, just because the Overlord ruler doesn't allow you to untap your resources outside of the untap phase. And then we don't really need to use the discount, because again, with Overlord, it lets us play it for 1, which also you can still play it at instant speed with Overlord as long as you have the 1 energy to pay to play it. So it's a little bit more cheaper to react using Lucifer to use it as a board wipe. For our level 3s, we first have one Vanrae. So this is a dragon that we can use to use for double attack. So sometimes it does take up both of your summoning caps, but that's usually fine with Overlord, where you use your 1 cost to play this, as we do have some other units that can be played during our opponent's turn aside from Lucifer. But then this can be used to double attack and get in damage that we need to. Next we have for Aras. Again, this card is very good. It prevents opponent Lucifers as well as damage-based decks because of the ability to negate effect damage, which can also negate our own Lucifer's damage. So if you get a Aras out and then you summon a Lucifer, it'll only affect your opponent's board. So that's why with Overlord, it lets you play an Aras for 1, and then next turn you still have energy up to use for a Lucifer. This will also bring out a Warrior by DRing 2. So then we'll go over the Warriors in a little bit. Next, for our level 2s, we have 2 Skulvitch. So this one, by discarding a card when you play it, you can search for a Demon Lord. So the only Demon Lord in this deck is Lucifer, because during the games you want to hit Lucifers as much as possible. And then the discarded card, when you use the ability, is not much of a trouble because of the level 0s that we actually want to discard rather than like having to play them if they're in our hands. We also have 2 Shioris, so this kind of hints for with Skulvitch, you can discard one of the familiars that we're going to be using with Shiori to summon one of our level 3. So the only main target that Shiori will be targeting is Aras, and then occasionally Vanrae, but then when you do for Vanrae, you don't get the touchdown ability, which is to get a shield charge. But again, Shiori is used mostly for summoning out our Aras. And then for our last level 2, we have Captain Liberty. So this is our second legend. This card could be replaced. Sometimes the deck doesn't get enough counters in the graveyard, because again with Shiori, a lot of our counter familiars will be shuffling back into the deck. So sometimes Captain Liberty doesn't get used a lot, especially because he is a defender. But Aras is also a defender too. So sometimes they kind of clash where usually you would prefer an Aras over a Captain Liberty. But there are other cards in the deck that fuel to reasoning why we are running Captain Liberty. For our level 1s, the first one we have is Anubis lookalike. So this is mostly a warrior for Aras that we can bring out of our damage. And then when it's destroyed, you can actually look at your opponent's hand and discard a card from it, which can be pretty good since a lot of the format is going to be hand-based rulers. And then even though 1 card's not a lot, having the choice to look at the hands, because annoying, especially if you're playing against like another deck like this where they're holding a lot of reactive cards, it can actually help knowing what they have and then preparing for it. Next we have 4 A7 Duchess Brawler. So this card is a warrior. So again, it's another target for Aras. It has a touchdown of to deal 1 damage to your opponent, and it also has 5 clearing power, which is pretty good for clearing out a majority of other units, especially even like other Arases. It's also a Reagan Leaf, so that means it can also be used for enhance for Lucifer when we summon it. So that way we get to keep our Lucifer around, because then we'll just discard this as a charge. And then lastly for level 1s, we have 3 A7 Cheshire Cats. So this is another unit that can be summoned during our opponent's turn, and then we can essentially give another unit 1 HP. And then giving 1 HP to most units will keep it alive from a Lucifer. So like it'll actually prevent your Lucifers from dying from its own ability, as well as like not necessarily Aras, but then like if your opponent tries to eons your Aras, you can give it 1 HP just so that way it survives, and then it forces them to like either waste another attack or waste more resources on that unit. You can also use it defensively to summon this to the defense zone when your opponent attacks, so that way you soak up an attack. You don't have to take as much damage. For our zeros, we have 4 Beastfolk Barbarian. So this is another warrior. If you need to target it with Aras, you can, and again 5 power, so that way it can breach through a lot of big toughness units. Then we have 4 Ragdoll Ketzith. So this card is one of the familiars that we can use with Shiori to bring out an Aras. It's also a pretty defensive counter, where if your opponent is not done attacking, but you hit this as a counter, you can place it in the defense zone, and then your opponent has to waste an attack, getting rid of it. Next we have 4 Forest Fairy. So this card is mostly just, again, defensive to place in our defense zone, especially in the early to middle game. It is also an owl, so it means you can place in the defense zone, and then when your opponent goes to attack, you could instant speed summon Lucifer and then enhance it with the Forest Fairy, and then your Lucifer will stay alive. And most rulers will not be able to destroy Lucifer on their own because of its 5 HP, except for Berserker with their base power. It also prevents breakthrough abilities, so for like Genesis summoning decks or even Berserker and other units that have breakthrough, this can prevent it where you don't have to actually take damage from their attack. And then our last unit is for Black Ketzith. So this is the one that's negative cost, so that's why we can actually run 68 cost in our deck. And then its counter ability is actually part of the reason why we're running it too, is with like Captain Liberty, because we also DR cards with Aras. The ability to heal kind of helps. It is kind of a drawback because it actually means as a counter it doesn't actually reduce the damage you take, so that's the only drawback from it, especially if you hit it as like the first one, then it actually deals you more damage. But again, the ability to have it be a familiar, it's also an owl, so you can actually place it like on the first turn in the center slot, and then you can enhance it with Lucifer, as well as, again, it's another target for Shiori, and it can become a level 1, so that way Shiori can get a level 3. For our events, we do run 2 Embrace of Aeons, so even though we can't play events on our opponent's turn, this can also still be useful for getting rid of annoying units that have like Charge Shield, opposing Arases, because again it does negate the abilities, and then it just allows us to do that. And even if you just hit it off of a counter check, the ability to just deal 5 damage or something and potentially kill another attacker is also very useful. Then we're running 3 Astromancy. So this card is just a draw 2, and so like from other card games, like with Yu-Gi-Oh, playing, especially since we're only paying 1 cost for it, it's literally 1 cost to draw 2 cards. So it means we're actually we're actually up a card. So this helps us dig through our deck a little bit faster. And then we also have 4 Skystrike Arrow. This card is very good for disrupting a lot of different deck archetypes, because a lot of decks do utilize the graveyard. The ability to remove those cards can be very helpful. So against like Genesis, something that want to like bring back their familiars, even getting rid of recurring cards like Captain Liberty or even the Captain Zombie can be really good for stopping those type of abilities. And then if you really need to, you can get rid of like the charge shield charges under a unit, so that way you can continue to disrupt your opponent. So this card is very good, and then when you do use its ability and it goes to the graveyard, you do get to draw a card, so it actually replaces itself. So that's why this card is very good for disrupting a lot of different deck types. And then also we have 2 G&G Armament Factory. So this just helps us deal more damage with Lucifer to hit that 6 cost. So sometimes the 6 cost can hit a lot of the Genesis summoning target dragons, as well as like for Aeons make it a 6. This card is probably the most flexible slot. You could consider running the level 1 event that deals 5 damage when you hit it on counter check, or 3 damage. Just because like drawing this card feels kind of bad. You know, during any part of the game, because you don't want to really pay the 1 cost to play it. So like unless you hit it off for counter check, it doesn't feel that great. But even as a counter check, you would probably want a lot of times that maybe that damage card instead. But again, sometimes this could be very helpful depending on like the type of decks you face. Like if you face a deck that has a lot of 6 cost stuff, like if you do against like the Dark Knights of God Odin, because your 6 is hitting one of this allows you to actually board wipe their whole field, whereas you know you get rid of the God Odin as well, or even things like Abervolt for the 6 HP dragons. So this card is probably the more flexible slot if you want to use the damage card. But again, if there's a lot of more decks that are running higher HP, because Lucifer is quite prevalent, this card could easily get replaced. But that's all for this deck profile. The deck list will be in the description again below. And then again, if there are other deck types you want to see, put in the comments, and then I'll be making decks all the way through until we get the next set. Supposedly in January, and then maybe we'll get different archetypes then. But then again, with this set, with set 3, because of the open card pool, so many different decks opened up, and then you know there's so many different variations you can do with decks, you know, from like different tweaks of like card selection, because there's so many options out there. But with that, thank you for watching, and then I'll see you guys in the next one.